We also have a vegetarian option that is coming out, but Maya and I today are actually showing you the short rib method.
Hi everybody, welcome to our Sunday supper party. My name is Maya. I am the tasting room lead at Emeritus Vineyards, and this is Paige Hansen, who is our direct-to-consumer manager and an author of a wonderful cookbook called Plate of Food. And we're going to be going through one of her recipes to be enjoyed with the William Wesley and Wesley Reserve wines that were included in your fall shipment. So Paige.
So first thing we're going to do is go ahead and season all of our short ribs. If you've ever wondered why your food tastes so good when you go out to dinner, restaurants use a lot of salt. And a lot of butter. But the one thing that you're going to notice is this is kosher salt that I'm using today, and it's a really fine grain. So even though it looks like a lot is going on, it's really not that much salt as if you were using, say, a table salt. So I'm just trying to get all sides of the short ribs right now. And as you're going through and looking at the recipe, one of the things that you're going to notice is I don't have you sear these. I've done this recipe seared and I've done it without searing, and I will be honest, I don't notice enough of a difference to take the time to sear. One of the reasons I think on that is because this is going to cook for 2.5 to 3 hours in the oven until the short ribs are tender. So there's plenty of time for everything to reduce, and I think that's what you're going to notice. So it's a really simple recipe. There's a couple of other unique things that I've added to this that you might not see in normal short rib recipes that we're going to get to in a moment. And I'll let you know what those are as we go on. So I'm just taking a large Dutch oven. I've sprayed it with some cooking spray to make my cleaning easier later on. We're going to just start putting in our short ribs. And literally everything's just going to get layered in on them.
This is the most foolproof recipe that I've ever seen.
Today we have about 3 pounds of short ribs. The recipe calls for 6. It's not to be alarming. It works great if you're feeding a crowd. It's also really nice for leftovers. I love having to cook one thing and have multiple meals that I can make from it. So from here I could maybe take and shred the short ribs and do it with pasta. I can make soup, sandwiches. So I like to cook once and then add it from there. So the next thing we're going to add is our mirepoix, which is just going to be carrots, celery, and onions. Just a nice rough chop on them. Again, eventually we're going to puree this, so you don't need to have perfect knife cuts, which is a really nice thing. So we're just going to, again, sprinkling everything in over our short ribs. And we can just move it around a little so that everything is getting nicely covered in there. So a couple of things that I add to my short ribs that are going to be a little different from everybody else is I add raisins. So sort of fun. Dehydrated grapes, raisins, you know. It's going to add a slight hint of sweetness, but it also just will really intensify nicely when it's cooking with everything. So again, just sprinkle your raisins in.
How did you figure out to add raisins?
I was just reading different recipes, and for whatever reason one day I decided to just throw raisins in mine, and I just loved how it turned out. So I've done it that way since then.
Cool.
Another thing I add is some instant espresso. So you can use instant coffee, instant espresso. If you don't have either of those, you can also just maybe take some coffee left over from what you brewed in the morning, just maybe reduce it down a little so it just intensifies in flavor. And this is, again, one of those things, we're not searing, but we're going to have really amazing, intense flavor at the end of this. So just sprinkle in our instant coffee as well. And the last thing is some tomato paste. So I'm just going to sort of brush this over the top. And the reason I like to put this in later is so it will brown a little on the top. And again, just intensify in those flavors.
I love the taste of caramelized tomato paste.
Yeah, it's just gonna add that nice little
oomph.
Yeah, you don't know what it is, but you know that there's something in there that you really like. Yeah. Next we can go ahead and start adding our cooking liquids, which is gonna be beef stock. We did choose a reduced sodium one. What's going to be great on this is that you're going to want to taste everything at the end and make sure it is the level of saltiness that you desire. And next we'll go in wine. Always want to make sure that it is a wine that you enjoy to drink, because again, this wine is going to reduce while we cook. And
I love this tip of yours.
so I don't know if this ever happens at your house. Normally it's when everybody's like, ooh, yeah, let's open a second bottle, maybe a third bottle. And all of a sudden you get to the end and you're like, oh, I've had enough. Like, it's not going to be enjoyed anymore. Freeze it. So it's great for cooking later on. And since alcohol never completely freezes, they make great little wine cubes, but they come out of your containers really nice and easily as well. So that's my little tip if you ever have it left over. And you can just keep adding. It doesn't have to be all the same. So I use it when I do like my pot roast, obviously, short ribs. Anytime I need red wine, that's what I will just grab it out of the freezer. So the last is we're just gonna throw our herbs in. If you don't have them all, don't worry. This is cooking. It's very forgiving. It's not baking, so it's not science. So I've got a bunch of thyme that I pulled out of the garden, along with a couple of stalks of rosemary. On the rosemary, you don't want to add too much. Rosemary is a pretty powerful herb, and we've got some parsley as well. If you've got extra parsley and thyme, I will eventually use to garnish. So simple enough. We're going to throw our lid on and let it cook for at least 2.5 hours. At that point, you want to check them. You're going to see, my test is, does the fork allow the short rib to pull off? If I have to like really work at it, it's not tender enough and it needs to cook a while longer. And each of them are going to vary. These have the bones on, so they might take just a little longer. If you buy short ribs with the bones in them, you're going to get more intensity from that bone, just a better flavor. So into the oven they go.
One of the things that I love about this recipe and with stews and braising in general is they usually get better with time. So if you are going to be joining us for our Zoom event, this is super easy to make the night before, quickly reheat it the day of, add some mashed potatoes or some pasta or polenta or anything and get your plate all set and ready to go.
Welcome back. The ribs have cooked for 3 hours and we are ready to go ahead and puree the sauce. When I was saying you want to cook until they're fork tender, literally just take a fork, and as long as the meat is coming right off like that, you're good to go. This is one of the meals that we joke with at home. If we need a knife, we're not eating it. So this is what we're looking for. So now all we want to do is remove all of the herbs that we had in there because we don't want to puree those stems. And of course, we're also going to remove the short ribs. We don't want to puree those either. So the bones we won't need any longer, but we want to make sure that we're keeping the short ribs over to the side because they're going to go back in our wonderful sauce that we're going to make in just a moment. And that one looks like it's still got some on, so we'll get the bone on the plate for that one. If you have an immersion blender, I find it to be the easiest to use on this. If not, just go into a regular blender. Just make sure if you're using a regular blender that you put a towel over the top. You don't want any hot liquid to come out on you. Also, keep an eye out for any bones that fell off while you were thinking you grabbed them all out. They won't puree. So what's good about this is you can see how this has reduced from this side of the pan, and this is again the great thing that you get from cooking in the oven. So this sauce has really started to come into its own with that reduction. As with anything you cook, you want to make sure that we're going to taste it before we season any more. This would be the great time to adjust any salt and pepper that you need to add. I'm really happy with where that is. So now it's time to start plating. I made mashed potatoes while the short ribs were finishing up. And so we're going to serve ours over mashed potatoes tonight. And then we're gonna get some of the great short ribs here to go right over the mashed potatoes. Depending on how hungry you are, how many little chunks you might want. If you haven't noticed yet, I'm sort of a grain fan, so I have some broccoli for mine as well. And then from here, just want to take and ladle out some of the sauce over your short ribs. And again, this is just everything that we just pureed, so really nice and rich. And if you want, again, a little more green color, if you have any extra parsley or thyme left around, just a few little sprinkles. Don't even need to chop it. You can just quickly. And then we look forward to seeing you on the 15th and look forward to seeing how your plates turn out.